Okay, with Jonathan Derksen, voices for Madidi as the short film played at the Environmental Film Festival. The short film is it's a national park in Bolivia, and you kind of center on this national park and sort of as an allegory of natural resources versus capitalism in a sense, right? Where kind of they're you want to keep the this park intact, I guess, right, for future
Really?
generations, and people want to do stuff with it, I guess. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's definitely it's a huge resource when it comes to going there as an eco-tourist or something like that. But more importantly, it's a gigantic watershed on the east side of the Andes. So what you have is, this intact rainforest that through evapotranspiration and rain and all these things, you have this valuable water source. And that combined with the fact that they're indigenous people who have lived there for thousands of years, that combination, it's a really good reason to keep the park intact for sure, and among many other things. Yeah.
So this is in Bolivia, which is in South America. I was looking at your bio. You lived there for a period of time, correct?
Yeah, so my family, my parents and brother and sister-in-law still live in Bolivia. So we've been associated with the country for about over 40 years. And of course, so it's very dear to our hearts, just like in our case here, Canada is dear to our hearts. And yeah, that's among Bolivians. It's the whole environmental awareness has been on the rise, and people are definitely looking into this kind of thing. And this is just one venue through which we can pass that message on.
So just doing the math, that you spent some of your formative years in Bolivia. What brought your family to Bolivia?
So we grew up as embassy kids. My dad was in Canada. We call it external affairs,
Yeah.
and I think in the States it's the State Department. But um, we grew up in different countries. Grew up in Japan. Spent about 6 years, 7 years in Japan, and in Malaysia and other places. And Malaysia especially got us into appreciating the jungle. My parents took us out in the jungle a lot. We did expeditions, and that kind of fired us up. And then my uncle, who had moved to Bolivia, and much later after we moved back to Canada for a little bit, my dad had an opportunity to go into business with his brother, my uncle, and which he did. And we moved to Bolivia after leaving the embassy life. So it was a big shock for us because we were used to pretty royal treatment, and then we were just on our own. And but Bolivia, of course, is part half mountains and half jungle. The country in general just amazed us, and we fell in love with it right away. I mean, it was just a huge playground.
That's amazing. So it sounds like you had quite the childhood. Like I just spent my childhood in suburbia riding bicycles.
That's pretty great too, right?
I
Um,
guess, but it's like I guess it's all the eye of the beholder, I guess, right? But it seems like
it,
you're like, yeah, you saw some amazing stuff.
well, it's just for us that was normal, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so um, going out and yeah, spotting monkeys in the trees and bringing in, pets, animals that we find as pets, at home and that kind of thing. It was kind of this menagerie that we lived in, and yeah, it was a pretty charmed life for sure. It was quite beautiful.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
So I've got an older brother, and then I have a younger sister, quite a bit younger
So
sister.
you're a
But
middle child. So
yeah,
how did documentary film or filmmaking in general come into the picture for you?
well, so I started off. I was way back in high school. I was going to high school in Bolivia, and there was this German photographer, Wolfgang Schuler, and
Very German, yeah.
yeah, he was a professional photographer, and his specialty was tribal life in the Altiplano, the high plains and the Andes, and but he also had association with our school, and so he would disappear for a month or 2 months, come back just beat up and like travel weary, but with the most amazing pictures of tribal life and indigenous life in the Andes. And then he would take time with us students. There was a small handful of us to teach us how to use manual cameras back in the day when it was film and slide and stuff like that. And he really inspired me to get involved with the visual format of telling a story, so photojournalism. And so, with his help, I developed my photography skills. And then, fast forward to the sort of mid 90s, and my wife and I were living in India in the Himalayas, and we, had an opportunity to do a lot of photography up there. But I met a guy, Tom Kidder, who was a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, and he was making some films up there in association with the school we were working with at the time. And so, through mentoring and my association with this guy, Tom, I just fell in love with that whole, way of expressing a story. And filmmaking back in that day was pretty problematic, with the way you edited and with cassette tapes.
Steinbeck machine. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. What were you going to say?
Steinbeck machine, like the cut and slicing and tape.
No,
Yeah.
well, we did a little bit of that, but this was more VHS, the
Oh,
cassettes
gotcha.
were
Yeah,
that
yeah,
big.
yeah.
And so when Tom left that school, I took over as the filmmaking teacher, and uh, I worked with a student on a project related to Tibetan kids fleeing uh, what was then Chinese occupied Tibet, and these kids would. I mean, it was just incredible stories of fortitude. Kids crossing the Himalayas, midwinter, landing in India eventually,
Yeah.
and then going to where the Dalai Lama lives up in Dharamshala to be near His Holiness, who they saw as kind of the equivalent of Jesus Christ in the Tibetan Buddhist practice. And so we followed this story. We did this documentary that went on to win a prize in London at this. It's called the London Peace Prize contest. That blew me away. The Dalai Lama actually came to our school, and we were able to hand a copy of the video to him. And he knew our school from other association, because when he fled Tibet, he actually landed in our town up in the Himalayas, and we took him in and gave him refuge. So that was, you can imagine, that was sort of this cathartic
Yeah.
experience where I thought, you know what, this is an amazing format, and there's so many good stories to tell and people to show to the world. And so yeah, I kind of had it in the back of my brain that I would do that. So anyway, those were the cathartic experiences. Then I launched into film off and on all the way through to moving back to Canada anyway. And then, just to finish up, it's a long
Yeah.
answer to your question. I was doing a lot of freelance journalism, and I managed to get in with a woman who had connections to National Geographic, and they wanted to do a shoot up in Bolivia on what they call the world's most dangerous road. And so I had traveled that road tons, I had lots of connections and so on and so forth. I've run some expeditions out there. And she wanted to do a documentary on the world's most dangerous roads. So Bolivia was one of those places, and I got to eventually join their crew. And that was a big launching point for career in film, joining National Geographic as an expedition leader, but then as an actual on-camera person, and then eventually shooting as well. So
You do, but you also have like you've published novels. You have like photography books that you've published.
yeah, so in combination with a Bolivian photographer who lives in Colorado now, he kind of got the ball rolling on two books. One was about the Altiplano, which is the high plain in the Andes, and just beautiful landscapes and wildlife and so on. And so I helped with primarily with the writing part of that and the editing. And then he did the Madidi book. We both had sort of a long association with Madidi already. And so I went into research and do the text for that book. He did, because it was his main livelihood, he did all the photography. And we turned out something we were pretty proud of. But it brought to the forefront what was going on in the park. And
Yeah.
so we were like, holy crap! I don't know if I can swear on this or not, but it really made us aware that the people there were fighting for the very existence of their traditional lands
Yeah.
and the uh, and the park, to continue existing. So that woke me up to doing this documentary.
So okay, so then we're at the documentary now, and what's the game plan for yourself? Like you're gonna obviously gonna have to go down there. Do you have like a certain outline? How you gonna like was it always gonna be like a 23, 24 minute short film? Like what was like
Oh, like I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Your doc starts out as one thing
yeah,
and then evolves into a completely different beast. And our original plan was to interview and film alongside a guy named Yossi Ginsberg, who had gotten lost in the Madidi National Park, almost died over the course of 3 weeks. But then the Uchupiamonas people, who I showcase in the final product, they saved him, and it was his gratitude to them that led him to help form the national park they now live in. So I was going to follow that story, but he had to bail on us literally 9 days before our shoot. So we were like, everything was set up. And I said, well, plan B, we
you
got
have a
all
good
the.
excuse at least, or
What's that?
you have a good excuse at least?
I no, not in my opinion. If you watch as this Yossi, I didn't, you had your
Yeah,
reasons, but we honored whatever the reasons were. We honored them. I
sure.
think no, I should qualify it though. He was going to bring a group of people down to see where this ordeal that he survived had unfolded, and I don't think he had enough people to justify the cost.
Okay.
So, we said, look, we'll pay for you while you're there. You just get yourself there. But, it just wasn't going to work. But the result was that we shifted the whole focus to the indigenous people, which probably should have been the focus to begin with.
Yeah. There's
So
usually blessing in disguises along the way, right? When you're making a
totally.
film.
And
Yeah.
that led us to meeting a lady by the name of Ruth Alipas, who kind of factors into, she when you watch the film, she becomes sort of the out front speaker, and she's, by far the most impassioned speaker. And I didn't even know who she was until I got there. And she was very gracious in giving us her time. And so that was something very eye opening and helped the film evolve.
So you give us a lot of context in the film where like there's a lot of I'm assuming drone shots, but then you have some nice animation maps because like for the North, where our us ignorant North American audience, we're so consumed by our own little worlds,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
We basically some people don't even that's why we even brought up at the beginning. Bolivia is in South America, just so for a reference point, right? Like not to say that most people don't know that. I'm just saying that just to make like so you give us a map, you give us context. Most people wouldn't know this national park, like in our audience at least. And so it gives us kind of a real kind of understanding of where we are. And it's like I know it's a small thing, but it's very important, and you keep going back to it in the film as well. And I thought that was a really nice touch, just from a storytelling standpoint.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because part of part of the issue with putting this documentary together was that because we had to shift our plans fairly quickly, it meant we were short on certain types of footage.
Yeah,
And so when I got back and I started putting the final story together, and it takes a long time to put the story together like this, but um, I felt, the gaps, they could be filled in with, white letters on a black background or something like that, or narration, which we ended up doing. And the
yeah,
narration seemed to cover it the best using those animated things. I'm not a big fan of those necessarily, but but I think you're right. I think it served its purpose to fill in the knowledge gap. Like, where is this place? And
yeah.
you fly in. It's the guys who did the animation really helped a lot because I said, look, I want this fly in. You zoom around, you see this, and they're saying, okay, well, we're gonna have to learn how to do this. So they did, and
Yeah.
I really appreciated what they did, and they were ex-students of mine, which was kind of cool too. Like it was it was fun to hire guys who I had worked with
Yeah.
in the or taught in the past. So
But I like
uh,
how you did the even the rivers, how the rivers come from the ocean on the other side of the. It's just like it just shows you where how everything kind of come merges
Right.
together to
Yeah, I
make
get
this
you have to
really
have
good.
some visuals for sure in something like this. It's just,
Yeah,
when you watch some of those the top tier document what I call top tier documentaries, let's say Jimmy Chin or whoever is doing climbing videos and so
yeah,
one thing they really try to avoid is narration, right? And it doesn't mean narration's bad. It's just that they let the people tell the story. They're showing, not telling, those
yeah,
kinds of things. And so
yeah.
there's always that balance. Are you doing enough? And to be fair, you're still showing, and that, like you said, you validated that, right? Which I
Well, it
appreciate.
depends who your audience is too. Like where like you watch those Disney wildlife movies, it's all narration,
Right,
right?
I know that's true. I noticed that.
And but it's still like because the kids are watching the film, right? Because they
Yeah.
want to have emotional context. So they're gonna name the bears or whatever whoever the subject is.
That's true. That's true. And we all watched March of the Penguins back in the day with
Yeah,
Morgan Freeman, and that
exactly.
that was wonderful. So,
Yeah,
you know,
because it
yeah,
gives us an extra but it all depends on the film, right? But I think for this
it does.
particular film, we needed because we needed to understand this world,
Right.
right? So then yeah, and then I just want to get to the subjects because you got some great interviews in
Sure.
the film. So where did you find everything changed 9 days into it? Where did you find all these amazing interview subjects?
Well, so I mentioned that photographer Sergio Bolivian, who I did the coffee table books with, and myself had the long association with Madidi. So my association with the park started before it was a park. And so as high school students, my brother and I and some friends, we took a dugout canoe down this river and ended up on the edge of what is now the park. But we got, we got dumped out of the boat, capsized, had to spend the night with indigenous people and hunters on the banks of river. Anyway, we had these huge adventures, and that introduced us to the area, and I loved that, man. That was just so fun, and wakes you up because you think it was a near death experience, and later, I found out that my high school PE teachers in La Paz, where I was going to school in the capital city, they helped uh, fund a small school in a town called San Jose de Uchupiamonas. And I heard them talk about it and so on and so forth. But it wasn't until the 90s when I was a teacher back at the same school I'd graduated from high school that my wife and I went to this village or out to that area, and eventually got to see the village. And what a place! 5,000 square miles of jungle, and there's one little village in the middle of it without any electricity, no phone, these kinds of things. It was really quite remarkable. The one thing they had was a river, and that was their highway. You know,
Yeah, it's all you need.
Oh, it was incredible to go there. And so my respect for my PE teacher, his name's Floyd Hall, and Gloria, I really thank them for introducing us to that area. And then eventually that evolved into in the late 90s I was doing photojournalism work and did some articles on the area. And then fast forward to 2006 7, we actually filmed in the area with as I said, National Geographic. And then that led to other projects down the road. So I had a lot of contacts. So I quickly went to those contacts, after, when we found out we were shifting the whole focus. I just jumped to those contacts, and it turned out that the guys who were the expedition leaders were actually the best people to interview because they were from the village. And so the people who actually owned and operated the indigenous tour operations, they were a great resource. And Ruth, who ends up being sort of the focus in that film,
Yeah.
one of the foci, she was also one of the directors of an eco lodge. So, but not just that, she's an eco warrior, right? And these people are fearless. They've had death threats, they've had all these things, and that those connections really ended up paying out and waking us up to a lot of what was going on.
But they have to be like agree to be on camera, and so what like, was that? Were they okay with everything? Like you told them what your vision was?
I did. Like I said, we want to bring this message to the forefront, and um, when it comes to getting permissions, both in writing and on camera, there really wasn't much hesitation. They just wanted to know, are they want to know that you're not going to make money off of them,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, this is a nonprofit film, and the whole idea behind it was a passion project that where we wanted to help the Uchupiamonas people. And when she saw that, and a lot of the people that I know, for example, I know one lady who runs a wildlife refuge nearby. They're good friends, and that lady who runs the wildlife refuge really trusts me, and I trust her, and I love what she's doing. So in those small circles that are in Bolivia, um, it goes a long way to help you set up these kinds of things. So but to answer your question more directly, she had already been dealing with what we call it, sort of the backlash from people like miners, loggers, all the people who stood to make money from
Yeah.
exploiting the park. And so she'd had death threats, she'd had people threaten her, and so on and so forth. And she says, you know what? And in the film, she says it. She goes, it's not like you plan, hey, today I'm going to be a eco warrior. It's like all of a sudden you're just thrust into it, and you
Yeah.
just carry on. And so she's been making greater inroads by attending. I don't know if you know about the COP. I forget what it's called exactly, but anyway, some of these big environmental climate change and other
Yeah.
symposiums in places like Colombia and so on. She's in attendance at those, alongside somebody named Haley Stewart, who is huge on river preservation and that sort of thing out of Washington State.
So the film, like I think it's heard that she's described as like the problem with the kids and the issues that the kids are having, and it's very sad, of course, right? And then you kind of like you can't end the film film this way, but
Right.
you kind of go into, I don't mean to laugh, but like you
Oh
go
no, I
into
know.
the long dark, you could go, you fade to dark black, so you fade to black, and then you kind of open it up, and then it says hope, and then you kind of give the audience, or give us the kind of hope to a positive kind of, like a hopeful positive future, I guess, right? Because this the kids, the stories with the kids is just very heartbreaking in so many ways.
Yeah, and we could have gone a different route with that, where I was starting to locate imagery and a little bit of footage of these stories. But you know what? It was brutal,
Yeah.
and it was so brutal. I just thought, you know what? I think the stories they tell painted a clear enough picture in people's minds that mercury poisoning leads to dreadful things. And yeah, and you're right. Like, I felt if I left it on that note, I mean, hey, that seems hopeless, but that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is that these people have made some big, you know, um, inroads into trying to preserve the place. And
Yeah.
well, a lot of it has to do with economics, but when the economy is good, the ecotourists come in, and ecotourism brings money into the area. And so people want to preserve the area. Hey, there's money coming in. When there's no
Yeah.
ecotourism, like in the 2008, you know, economic fallout, that area got really nailed because nobody was traveling at the time. And right
Yeah.
now, with the current government, it's kind of touch and go because the current government, Mas, isn't that receptive to. They don't have great relations with the states. They don't have great relations with a lot of countries on the outside.
No.
So it discourages. If you're an American, you have to come in with a visa. That's a bit of a pain. You go to Peru, you don't have. I don't think you have to. I'm not
Yeah.
positive about that. But so it rechannels a lot of the ecotourism when this area, from an ecotourist point of view, is the most biodiverse in the world. It has everything going for it. So that's where I wanted to end, was on that note of the proliferation of life and the dedication of these people to just carry on in the face of hardship. A lot of us would have quit at the
Yeah.
beginning. So that really impressed us.
It's like you get into the politics of Bolivia, and it's not great. And it's like it's almost like there's a bigger film there if you chose to go there. And but it's involved, right? Like it's
Yeah.
you can't say there it's not a like you kind of touched on it, but it's just like that's part of the this how the system is, right? So
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say this about it. Evo Morales, who was in power as the president for a long time, like since the 90s till, well into the 2000s, he helped to pass this declaration of the rights of Mother Nature. It's a beautiful idea. Mother
yeah,
Nature has rights, almost like a human being, almost like an entity. And that's very in keeping with the indigenous and sort of Inca way of thinking, because that whole area used to be and is still populated by people of Incan ancestry. A lot of the old belief systems are in place. So saying that you're going to give Mother Nature rights is really popular among the people. They're like, of course you should, because that's what we believe in. We believe everything has a spirit. We believe, Mother Earth is embodied in this mountain called Mount Illimani in the middle of La Paz, or near La Paz. Anyway, so it was very effective. But the problem was he didn't stick to that. When it came to things like selling mining concessions and logging concessions and so on, and apparently legal, well, it said the exact opposite. Actually, Mother Nature is not,
yeah,
you know, is not going to get protected by us.
yeah,
We're going to exploit Mother Nature, and that was the message that started to come across to, especially in indigenous people in the lowlands, where a lot of this was going on, and to some in the highlands too. And there's lots of friction between groups too. Different groups have different loyalties, and so it's not to say that good things didn't happen under his presidency, but that was one that I certainly wasn't in
sure.
support of.
So you're saying that some politicians kind of were dishonest and didn't do what they said, which
Imagine that,
yeah.
right?
But it sounds like he was trying to please both sides, right? Which I guess politicians try to
Oh
do.
yeah, I mean he went on a this guy Evo Morales went on a public speaking thing through in other parts of the world, and he appears on, for example, Jon Stewart on the Late Show, and
Yeah,
he's talking about the rights of Mother Nature, and Jon Stewart's all in awe. And then you see Bolivia years later on the ground in person, and you just see it's not happening. And often, unfortunately, it's either, well, it's big corporations coming in,
yeah,
uh, and they do the big changes, right?
yeah,
So somebody's sold them the concession. Are you going to blame the corporation? Well, yeah, not really, as long as they're doing their due diligence. But are they having to do environmental diligence, because who's going to check them, right?
yeah. It's the regulations,
So
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
and so the Chinese have gone in and they've done things, and the U.S. has gone in the past and make big changes, and there's no one. Uh, there are lots of culprits, right?
yeah.
So
From a broad stroke standpoint, like the South America has had an interesting 25 last 20 25 years.
oh man.
Is that they seem to be like on the rise, and then a lot of political corruption in like in Brazil and other countries, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of par for the course. But one thing you can say is that Bolivia enjoyed the most stable period in its history under this guy
yeah,
Evo Morales. Like when I was there in the 80s, early 80s, we were undergoing coup d'etats and we had curfews, we would get police checkpoints, all that kind of stuff, and that disappeared under Evo Morales. It doesn't mean other things didn't appear, but
yeah.
um, but by the same token, you think all the other things you could have achieved when it comes to protecting an environment, and usually that's left up to NGOs and other groups like Conservation International,
Yeah.
and so on, to come in and try to work a deal, the debt for nature swap or something like that, and that's has been actually fairly effective, but not without its problems as well.
So it sounds like yeah, there's a lot to touch into this film. So like
Yeah,
obviously you're watching this film and it's like you're just kind of amazed by it and you're amazed by the beauty. You got some really great, amazing animal shots. How you pulled that up is fantastic. And then obviously the kind of the sad aspects of Mercury and children and the next generation, because that's what it's all about. It's about the next generation
It
and
is.
them to be, be educated and healthy, of course, is beneficial. So there's like so much to touch on with this film. And of course you want to go there now too, after seeing this
Well,
film.
that's crucial. Like if people want
Yeah.
to see it for themselves,
Yeah.
that's huge. If I could just do a quick shout out too, like there was a guy, he's a birding specialist, biologist, Bennett Hennessy, and there's a guy Patricio Crooker who gave us footage, and Sergio Bolivian, the photographer, my sound guy Craig Powell. These are all people who know that area really well, and they supplied me with things like the great bird shots. I had some, but then this one guy Bennett, he has dedicated his life to that in Bolivia, and his wife is this woman Ruth, who we interview, and
Yeah.
he's the ones who told us there's like 1,000 plus species in that area, and it's just spectacular, and it really, I've never been much of a birder, but man, I sure wanted to be when I left there. And there's one guy that we interview. His name's uh, why is it escaping me right now? But anyway, there's one guy who's the number 6 birding guide in the world. Like, and
What is
that's what's
that?
that?
What does that mean if you're the number 6 birding guy in the world?
Yeah, so I wanted to know what that meant, and so some high level international birders had come in, and um, they had uh, they had him as a guide, and when he finished, they said he, along with 5 others that we've encountered in the world in all these national parks and so on, stand out among all the other birding guides. So it kind of
Okay.
gave him this reputation as the 6th most famous, or best birding guide in the world. Yeah, that was pretty interesting.
It is
But
interesting. So what's next for you? Are you making another film or?
yeah, so I am working on a concept right now, where it's more of a, yeah, I don't know what to call it yet. It's a documentary, but it's the idea of how in our own place, like you said, you rode bikes around, through the streets. How do we connect to the land wherever we're raised and at?
Yeah.
And how can that be a sacred process? I don't mean it in a cheesy way. I'm just saying though that what wakes us up to the reality of the life and interconnection around us, especially related to the land. And I spent a lot of time with different indigenous groups, and if there's one thing that they all share in common, and that is this connection to the land. you
Yeah.
know and like I was up in the Yukon, up on the last inhabited town called Old Crow, on the way to the Arctic Ocean, and these people, they always go, oh, I'm heading out onto the land, and they just disappear, man. They just go. I love that, and they're not afraid of it. They're in harmony with it. And so anyway, I'd love to transfer that to our little back corner of British Columbia here, and give it a universal application. So we'll see how that turns out.
Well, I wish you the ultimate best of success. I think your
Hey, thanks,
film's
man.
fantastic, and you're a great interview. And I actually want to jump into your office here with all the
Oh, here, take a look.
go through all your books. It's kind
Move
of
out of the
amazing.
way. Yeah,
Yeah.
so a lot of books that I inherited from my dad, who he's still alive, but he's culled his library, and then lots of like little, mementos and memorabilia
Yeah.
from different countries. Like you can't really hear it. Can I
Is that an
move?
encyclopedia at the top? Like the old
Yeah, like
fashioned encyclopedia?
those are National Geographics,
That's
and
geographics. Okay.
I've got like old. I don't know if you can see up in the corner
Yeah.
there. That's a crossbow that I was on a Discovery Channel shoot, and we were in with these ex headhunters, and these guys had these crossbows, and so we traded a Swiss Army knife for a crossbow. This kind of stories, right? Like just kind of fun. But
If vampires come, you got the crosses and you got the crossbow.
yeah, there are a few crosses around. It's true. Yeah, I don't know. There's more behind it. I think something psychological there. I think you hit on something. But
All
yeah,
right, man. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. And let's talk again when you make your next film.
really good to meet you.
Thank you.